Hello and welcome to this How Good is Our Hall presentation for the Culture Collective. This is a presentation about a tool that I developed with Safe Harbour OpenSea, a tool that can help us to evidence impact. So my name is Claire Abbott. I have had somewhat of a non-linear career trajectory. I went to art school here in Aberdeen and studied at Grey School of Art and got my BA Honours in Sculpture. I then worked various different jobs for about 10 years before finding myself working in a community setting and realising that I was wildly under-equipped to be working in these community learning and development contexts. So I returned to university to do a work-based postgraduate diploma and achieved my Masters in Education in Community Learning and Development. I stayed on and returned to some creativity by doing a Master of Letters in Creative Writing, and I'm currently working as a freelance creative community worker and a yoga teacher. So I'm not going to spend too long talking about CLD and critical pedagogy, but I thought it might be important to situate my practice in its historical context. So CLD is considered a branch of education. It's a values-based vocation, and those values are self-determination, which is respecting the individual and valuing the right of people to make their own choices. Inclusion, valuing both equality of opportunity and outcome and challenging discriminatory practice. Empowerment, which is increasing the ability of individuals and groups to influence issues that affect them and their communities through individual and/or collective action, and working collaboratively. So maximizing collaborative working relationships in partnerships between the many agencies which contribute to CLD, including collaborative work with participants, learners, and communities. The final value here is promotion of learning as a lifelong activity, ensuring that individuals are aware of a range of learning opportunities and are able to access relevant options at any stage of your life. And we really mean learning in its broadest sense, so the kind of learning that we do when we're living our day-to-day lives and reflecting on and growing. And we don't really mean learning in a kind of in the sense of formal education. The profession is underpinned by its own code of ethics. It has a regulatory body called the CLD Standards Council, and this wheel here is a wheel of competencies which underpin the actual nitty-gritty of the practice. It's considered to have three strands, which are adult learning, literacy, and adult learning, which would comprise literacy and numeracy work, and also ESOL, which is English for speakers of other languages, youth work. Anybody under 25 is considered a young person, so it can be 12 to 25 or 16 to 25, so work with young people, and community development, which was my specialism. So I would like to introduce you to this guy here with the beard. This is Paulo Freire. Some of you may already recognize him. Paulo Freire was a Brazilian educator and philosopher who is best known for his work on critical pedagogy. So according to Freire, pedagogy is the process of teaching and learning, but he posits that this is not a neutral process. Instead, he believes that pedagogy is inherently political and can either reinforce or challenge power imbalances in society. Freire's approach to pedagogy is rooted in his belief that education should be a tool for liberation and social justice. He argued that traditional education, which is based on a banking model of knowledge transfer, where teachers deposit information from the minds of passive students, reinforces oppressive systems and perpetuates inequality. So instead, Freire proposed a more democratic and participatory approach to education, which he called problem-posing education. In this approach, teachers and students work together to identify and analyse social and political issues, and they collaborate to find solutions that address these issues. So it's really about a student-teacher relationship, which is where the teacher is both learning from the student and the student is also teaching the teacher. And yeah, it's not in a traditional classroom setting. We recognise that everybody has something to teach us and that we have gifts and teachings to share with others too. So this approach emphasises critical thinking, dialogue, and the active participation of students in the learning process. So overall, Freire's conception of pedagogy is not simply a technique for imparting knowledge, but a process empowering individuals and communities to challenge social injustices and work towards a more equitable society. So this book here, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, is quite a slim volume. It only has about 4 chapters, but it's the language that it uses is very complex and dense. And if you are looking to delve into it further, I would recommend you do so with a group of friends and colleagues. Pop a little reading group around it and start to unpick the text together, because that's where the richness of the dialogue and the conversations can really take place. So this is what I did and a few years ago, and I found the book very difficult to understand on my own, but much more a much richer reading experience when I had other people with me to bounce some ideas around. So a little bit about community development, which is my field of practice. This is a definition from the Scottish Community Development Centre. I have included a list of useful links at the end of this presentation, so if you do want to delve into any of these things further, then they'll be at your fingertips, including a link to the Scottish Community Development Centre's website. So this is a 60-second definition from SCDC. Community development is a process where people come together to take action on what's important to them. It helps communities to organise and to identify the issues they want to address or the opportunities they want to explore. This can be done with communities of place or communities of shared identity, but I would actually take that one step further and say that it can also be done with communities of purpose, which is perhaps united around a single issue, like a pressure group, for example, and communities of practice too, communities of practitioners who are all working in the same or similar fields. And we can see here the link with Freire's pedagogy. Community development happens across Scotland. It's probably happening somewhere near you, and perhaps you're involved in it yourself. Local groups use their skills and experience to make positive change. It starts from the belief that everyone should have access to equal health, well-being, justice, wealth, and opportunity. But it also realises the way society and structures are organised means some people, groups, and communities can end up being excluded and oppressed. So community development challenges this by supporting communities to use their own assets to improve community life, helping communities and public bodies to work together to improve how services are run and how decisions are made. In the end, community development is about making fairer, just, and more inclusive societies with strong communities at the heart of decision making. So that's a wee whistle-stop tour of community learning and development, Freire's critical pedagogy, and a further delve into community development as a field of practice. So I was lucky enough to be appointed as a legacy worker for the Safe Harbour Open Sea project based in Fitty. Now, Fitty is a wee village nestled in my hometown of Aberdeen. It's quite a special place, nestled between the city and the North Sea, and many people describe it as the closest thing Aberdeen has to an artist's commune because of the creative vibe that it generates. So this particular project, Safe Harbour Open Sea, the Culture Collective project, was a consortium of Open Road and the Fitty Community Development Trust. So the trust had recently taken over an unused building over the past sort of 7 to 8 years, and they turned it into a community hall using the community asset transfer legislation. In fact, I've been told that they are the first group in Scotland to have used this legislation to take over the hall for community use. And they were just about getting ready to swing the doors open and start using the hall when COVID struck. And so Safe Harbour Open Sea was established to counter some of the negative impacts that COVID had on this community. I didn't enter the project until about a year after it had been running, and one of my tasks was a community consultation. So I did lots of things for this consultation. I did surveys, wee leathers, big leathers, but one of the things that we're slightly obsessed with in CLD circles is how you know what you know, that epistemological question. And the answer for us is usually evidence. So my role as a legacy practitioner is simply about what is left behind. And this whole project, we're very aware that the creative practitioners were guests in a community of permanent residents. And I wanted to make sure the results of the consultation left them with something useful, something that they could use. I decided to draw inspiration from the How Good Is Our Place methodology that I'd used with community groups in the past in order to create a self-evaluation tool which would get people thinking about where their community hall project is now and where they've come from and where they want to be in the future. I could see that the Development Trust and the Safe Harbour Open Sea project was having a hugely positive impact on Fitty and the wider community in Aberdeen, and I wanted to create a tool that would provide an evidence baseline against which they could prove and measure their impact. But why do we need to evidence impact? Well, as the impact of community work states, being able to provide evidence of the value of what you do working with communities is clearly important for lots of good reasons that quickly come to mind. It can help secure funding, improve the long-term sustainability and profile of your work, as well as improving your own practice and keeping communities themselves informed of progress. It can also be used to meet the demands of funders, show value for public money, and improve effectiveness. And it can improve your own practice as well as a practitioner. So there are loads of different evaluation toolkits embedded into lots of different fields of practice. And I had decided to adapt this place standard, how good is our place, for this context. But there are loads of others, so that we have how good is our school, how good is our CLD, how good is our ARCs for health and well-being, and many more. I'm sure that there are many more that I've never heard of that you probably know about. But evaluation is often a word that can strike fear into the hearts of even the most courageous of practitioners. So I wanted to take a wee moment here just to acknowledge that and invite you to consider your experiences of evaluation and evidencing impact, whether that's having your project scrutinised by an external agency or whether it's doing a self-evaluation either individually or with a group. So this is the How Good is Our Hall wheel, which you can see on the front cover of the document itself, the PDF document, which you'll have access to. And we have a number of indicators here, including active travel, public transport, things like access, environment, and these are our measures. So we're going to score all of these indicators on the measure, which runs from 0, which is not very good, all the way up to 8, which is excellent, with barely any room for improvement. So once the group that we worked with in Fiddy had gone through this tool, we ended up with something that looked a little bit like this. So we can clearly see a really easy snapshot of the things that we're doing really well at and the things that perhaps need a little improvement. So I brought these people, the group in Fiddy, together for a big blether, and the big blether was a facilitated conversation whereby we worked through the How Good is Our Hall methodology. And on each of the indicators, there was a series of prompt questions so that we know that we're making a rigorous and sound judgment on each of the things that we have our opinions on, and we're scoring those using a rigorous process. And the process involved a lot of dialogue and deliberation. Dialogue and deliberation are processes of facilitated communication that enables groups of people to come together to discuss complex or contentious issues in a respectful and collaborative way. So dialogue involves open and honest communication. It's a little bit different from a regular conversation. It involves active listening, an exchange of ideas and perspectives, and then the deliberation part involves a more structured and goal-oriented process of decision-making that involves weighing different options and perspectives. So for the dialogue, we would open up the conversation, consider a series of prompt questions, listen to each other, and then for the deliberation, we were trying to find a consensus and agree on a consensus for the score that we wanted to score that indicator. So these processes of dialogue, deliberation, and consensus meeting are important in community contexts because they enable a diverse group of people to work together to address complex issues and find solutions that are fair, just, and sustainable, and also rooted in that rigorous process. By fostering mutual understanding, empathy, respect, dialogue, and deliberation can also help to build trust and social cohesion within communities, which are essential for creating positive social change. A consensus is a general agreement or collective decision reached by a group of individuals characterized by the absence of active opposition or dissent. A consensus meeting is important for community groups because they provide a forum and inform what kinds of actions to take next. So what we're really talking about here is people being able to exercise their local democracy, their voice, and feel empowered. So the process with the group in Fitty had some unintended outcomes. There were some young people that came along and they brought with them some fresh perspective. And there was also some friction involved in this process of dialogue and deliberation. Emotions came up. People had been involved in getting the hall open and in community use for many, many years. And when new people come in, it can be, without the historical perspective, it can be quite difficult for others to hear their perspectives. So here are so the idea being that the FITI group would return to this tool in a year or 2 years and see what kinds of improvements that they had made. Here are my list of useful links which will be available to you. And I'd like to thank you for listening. I hope that this presentation has potentially sparked some ideas for your own future uses. And I would like to thank you very much.